All right, so we're live here, 52 weeks of AWS, and we have John and Mike, who are the authors of AWS Cookbook, Recipes for Success on AWS, and you can buy a copy. In fact, you better hurry and buy a copy because I'm seeing there are only 3 copies left on Amazon. So it appears to be a pretty popular book. You both want to introduce yourself? Maybe John first.
Sure. Thanks for having us, first of all, this evening. We're looking forward to a great chat. My name is John Culkin. I'm a solutions architect at AWS, so I really enjoy working with our customers to envision types of solution and how to program them on AWS.
Cool.
Hey, I'm Mike. Thanks for having us as well. I'm a senior architect at AWS. I work directly with customers in the financial services industry on a whole lot of things like migration and application modernization and infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to showing our book here.
Cool. I mean, maybe one thing to start with, because I've been doing things with O'Reilly for maybe 15 years or so. How many books have I written? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4th book. So I'm on the 4th book for O'Reilly, and I've had really great experience working with them. Not to kind of butter them up or anything, but what was your experience working with O'Reilly and writing the book? And anything good or bad, or how did everything go?
I'll take a shot at it first. I think it's an interesting story how we got set up with this process. So Mike and I worked together previously at CloudReach and also with a gentleman named Jeff Armstrong. He was writing a book for O'Reilly and brought me in as a technical reviewer. And that was just a great way to get exposure to the process, what's expected. And then at the end of the process, I had some ideas to make a book proposal, and Mike and I put that together, and it was great to see it actually come to fruition. It took a while to write, but personally, I find that I learn a lot by teaching. So, having to rack my brain for our experiences and what worked well, and what we thought people wanted to learn about building on AWS was a really great way for me to just press myself to learn the CLI, learn the CDK, and actually do the work. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've my experience as well with what you're saying is really similar, in that I think many people don't realize that by writing a book or teaching people, you're actually improving your own skills. And in a sense, if you can, every 2-3 years or even earlier, can you build out a process where you're always doing some kind of content project where you're teaching people. So I think your experience jives a lot with what I try to do as well. How about you, Mike?
I had a really fun time working with our technical reviewers. I mean, the book, wouldn't be what it is today without our technical reviewers. It was really great to be able to see that and peek under the hood of that process, and have some of the smartest people around, look through things very, very closely, and say, oh, maybe try this little bash shortcut, or maybe try this instead of doing it this way. And it was great to get that feedback as we were building the book, and also get the positive feedback too. Like, hey, I didn't think this would be good to show, but the way you've put this and presented it, is really valuable. I haven't seen this written this way or shown this way before. So hats off to our technical reviewers. It was such a great experience working with them as part of the process.
Yeah, the technical reviewer process, I think, is something that is worth calling out to people, because a lot of people ask me, hey, I want to write a technical book. How do you get started? And I think what you mentioned, John, is in fact maybe one of the best ways is to volunteer as a technical reviewer for a company. Let's say it's O'Reilly, and then see the process, help the author out. And then what'll happen is that now you understand what's involved in writing a book, and then you can now write a book yourself if you choose to. So, and you have the introductions, right? Because you're actually developing networking with the editor, the other people at O'Reilly, the author. So I think that's actually a stealth secret that many people don't know.
And one more part of the technical review process that kind of gave me confidence was seeing how messy and maybe imperfect things are before they're completed. So some of the best advice I've heard was kind of write with fire, edit with ice. So don't be afraid of having to write something perfect from the start. Know that there's many steps, many iterations to get to that, finished product. So it was really enlightening to me to see how, things weren't perfect when I was reviewing them, and then looking at how great they turned out for Jeff's book, A Manager's Guide to Migrating AWS. Quick plug there, but I like that process.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I've found that as well as a good strategy where it's really easy to overthink things when you're doing a technical book or a course, and it's in a way almost psychological versus the work. I mean, it's there's work, you have to do it, but especially writing a technical book, there's something about it that's mentally just really scares you. It's like, for I'll be honest, the first book I wrote, the thoughts were like, okay, people are gonna figure out I'm a fraud. I don't know what I'm talking about. People are going to be mad and they're going to write blog posts that say how stupid I am, and you get really paranoid about all this stuff. And to your point, I think a lot of it is just actually building it. And there's a great expression I came across recently in a book about metacognition where the author said there's something called expertise induced amnesia. And that's one of the advantages of actually discovering some of the content that you're writing about is you don't have that. So in a sense, you could say that if you are new to some of the material you're writing, it's actually better to to be an author that way. So I think it's also maybe a good way to think about things if you get really worried about, your own technical expertise, is that in fact it could work to your advantage to not know it perfectly.
Good point. That's interesting stuff.
Yeah, I've got a question here from Rodrigo. Said that's a great tip. Thanks, Noah. So we have some people popping in here. Yeah, feel free to ask anybody questions about anything in the book. I'll just kind of go over the table of contents here. I was just looking through. You've got security to start with, which is I think a great way to start the book. Then you dive into networking and get into some pretty technical things like VPCs and gateways, and then get into storage. Talk about storage solutions, databases, serverless, containers. Then you get into big data, AI/ML, account management. Yeah, I think this is a not a bad set of topics to just have at your fingertips. I could definitely see having a book like this like sitting right next to me, and I'm working on something on AWS, and it's like, oh, well, let's see, do they have a recipe for S3? And then you go and you look at some example. And in particular, was there a chapter that either of you two really enjoyed working on more than another, or were they all equally fun to work on?
I can take that one. I had a lot of fun with the containers chapter. I know John and I collaborated on that one, and had a really good time just exploring, some of the things that we've done, in our daily work, but thinking about them, from the reader perspective. Some things we take for granted, and then we'll, think about it, how to present it, and explain a little bit more in depth. But working with, the new Copilot CLI, or our scaling and ECS service, those were really fun to build out, and just show very simply how easy it is to get a container deployed. There's a bunch of different ways. I think some people out in the Twitter sphere have been keeping a good count on how many ways there are to deploy a container on AWS. So there's definitely several. We chose a few and presented them out that way. And then after that, the databases chapter was also really, really fun to dig into and dive into things like RDS proxy and connecting to connecting to databases from Lambda functions. Some really fun stuff we've got in there too.
My favorite chapter was also containers because I got to read all of Mike's knowledge. But I think like what you just mentioned, having to research a new topic and then discover things in use as you go, helped me really enjoy the AI chapter. So definitely was aware of the AI services, kind of these API ready endpoints that AWS had, but really getting a chance to use them for use cases. And I think that's a little bit of what the book is about, use cases. We love the documentation. It's really great. It tells you what's available as far as features, different services and how to use them. What we tried to concentrate on was use cases that would solve real world problems, to give readers an example about how to put these things together in a recipe, if you will. And then hopefully they go out and they're going to make better things than we could ever imagine. But it's a start to see what could be possible.
Yeah, the containers I think would be a great one to just dive into a little bit. The One of the ways that I've been thinking about containers is that if you think about virtual machines, my opinion of them is that they're in a sense, uh, they have a legacy of the physical data center, heavily associated with them. Where if you think about VMware or some of these big virtualization technologies, it's all about you take Windows and or Linux and you bundle it up into a 30 to 100 gig image and then stop it and start it. And that concept I think is interesting, and obviously there's a lot of demand for it and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But to me, that kind of virtualization feels like an internal combustion engine, where obviously internal combustion engines are not going away. Like, we're going to have them for a long time. But it turns out that electric vehicle technology, at least if we're talking about pure performance, blows the doors off of even the fastest internal combustion engine. So the tech, and then now your car becomes like an iPhone. Like, I have a couple places I go back and forth from, and I have battery backup and I have solar, and like I have like my own gas stations. I go back and forth, and it's like a little iPhone that just gets charged. And it's one of these things that is kind of cool, because with gas, it's actually a liquid substance, that you have to find the gas and then literally have a hose and put it in. But with electric technology, it could be in a battery, it could be in a solar. Like, you can drive somewhere and like let it sit for a while and then go somewhere. It's like it opens up this other like paradigm for transportation. And what I think about when I think about containers is kind of the same thing. Is like you can look at a GitHub repo, and there's a Docker file, and then now you know what's in it, and you know what it's going to do when it deploys, and your entire project is literally viewable by just observing it. And then in addition, unlike a virtual machine, a container you could launch in 10 milliseconds, right? You can spin these up, and so I think that's one of the ways I've been kind of thinking a little bit about containers versus virtual machines. Is it's like this technology shift where VM is definitely like heavily influenced by the physical data center, but a container in a sense is one of the most cloud native technologies in existence, and we may just be at the start of what could be an explosion of new techniques. And you mentioned a few of them, like, for example, pushing containers to ECR. I think many people don't realize how big of a deal that really is, and what that actually opens up if you have DevOps systems that push containers and version them and scan for security and all this stuff. It isn't just that you're pushing the container. You have other systems like, for example, AWS App Runner or some of the other ECS that can actually slurp it up, and then now it's continuous delivery. So yeah, what are your thoughts on my half-baked ideas on containers?
I think that's awesome. I mean, it's I think your point about opening up a whole new world of possibilities, and especially mentioning that DevOps component, if you've got, if you're building often and you're pushing, and like I think our recipe number 2 in that chapter talks about how to start scanning for vulnerabilities, you can have your images be pushed and stored in your private ECR, which it's only accessible to you. You can grant who or what can have access to it. But furthermore, if you're scanning on push or continuously scanning, you'd be able to detect a dependency that might have had a vulnerability associated with it. So maybe you've got log4j or something in an old container image, and your scan does pick that up. Very, very powerful stuff there. And to be able to build once and kind of run anywhere is a pretty powerful kind of assurance for a software supply chain, because you can build it once, you can get the checksum of that container potentially, and then ensure that that thing is running everywhere that it's supposed to be and not some drift of that. So very, very powerful stuff there.
I like how you talked about improving the data center with the cloud. I think that's what we think a lot of when we think about what is the cloud and, how it can improve things as we, move forward. But containers are exciting as well. I think what Mike said about the consistent environments and then sharing things, I think with layers and images is pretty exciting.
Yeah, the thing I think that's interesting about again, kind of going to the EV technology versus internal combustion engine is that when you think about the EV technologies, there's things that are available that are new that there's no possible way to make those things available to internal combustion engine. So, for example, no person can put a gas station in their house. Like as much as you want to, you cannot put a gas station with, uh, you know, whatever 92 octane gas in your house. Doesn't work. You can do that with with a battery backup system and some solar energy and or wind or whatever you want. You can have a new form of technology, right, where you have passive charging or passive filling of your transportation system. And I think that's one of the things that's very interesting as well. Like you mentioned, the security scanning thing, where that is not available, right? You can't just say, oh, I want to scan all of my code for vulnerabilities. Like there's halfway solutions that partially do that, right? But the container is now like a permanent new form of technology where you can where it's now becoming embedded, right? With the whole process is security scanning is now an enhancement. I think the other thing you mentioned too, of this idea of checksum based deploy, that was the dream scenario when I've been doing deployment with things like Puppet or Chef or whatever. You that was one of the things. You would look at the Git hash and have some kind of a alert that would say, oh, we deployed this one to this other one. And but they're basically like, you're chasing a solution or band-aid for a bad technology because that was the only one you had at the time. Like running a bunch of scripts on a server somewhere, and they could take from 1 minute to 40 minutes, and it may or may not be the latest version of your software. That's not great, right? but a container where you can instantly tell, for example, the checksum is deployed on every single instance that you want to deploy to, and it's binary, right? It's like the container is running or it's not running. Like that's a new technology, right? It's a new form of deployment. And I think, to me, that's one of the things that's really exciting, is that what we know right now is the stuff that you covered, and it's a good foundation. But in 2 years, what will happen? I don't know if we know.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I think another interesting thing, that EV comparison is pretty neat. So a lot of folks think that, or it's been hypothesized that EVs might be a longer term benefit for consumers because of the lower maintenance overhead, not having to maintain a specific engine. And that could be said as well for containers. Maybe just the infrastructure that you run them on, you start to care less about that infrastructure, and you don't have to really manage it. If you use a managed service, you can just put some containers up, say with App Runner or ECS, and away you go, and you don't have to worry about that little thing there underneath. So less maintenance overhead is also really, really compelling for folks that are getting into container space.
And we got a question here that says, can you tell more about the AI ML recipes in the book?
Sure, that's a great question. So I'll go give a quick rundown of the recipes that we have in that chapter, and we could talk a little more about any one of them if you're interested. But first one is very relevant: transcribing a podcast. So, great to know that there's easy ways if maybe you want to read a podcast, don't have time to, or the ability to put on some headphones and listen to great podcasts like this one. So that's a, interesting example to walk through. And then the opposite, really, converting text to speech, and not just, the rudimentary basic way, but we added a couple examples of using, SSML tags to really add some emphasis and some different ways to flavor your speech that you created from text. A computer vision analysis of form data is the third recipe, and that was I think that's a great example of ways that people kind of forget or don't know the cloud can provide benefits. So let's say that you were an insurance agency, and for years the process was for people to come and fill out the forms by hand, and of course that can and should be improved. But how could you then take the form from that point and improve it and digitize it? So a great example of using text tracks to really pull out the values from a handwritten form for then further processing. That was fun. Redacting PII using comprehend, another great example when you're kind of reading and understanding text from a document and then having to redact or act upon certain text strings and different types of things like that. I don't want to hog all these, Mike. Let's see. Detecting text in a video. What do you think about that one?
That was a fun one. Just being able to feed in a video that might have some text overlay. We show pretty simply, actually, how you can take that text and have it be dumped out. Another cool one, physician dictation analysis using Amazon Transcribe Medical and Comprehend Medical was pretty neat. So we're kind of wrapping a couple services together and seeing how they work in a kind of a healthcare scenario. And then our last one in that chapter, we did determining location of text in an image. That could be pretty neat on a lot of images coming in, and you need to be able to find some interesting points in them and just plot some XY coordinates. We show how to do it. I think we use our book cover image as a way to bootstrap that one, and that was really, really neat to see how that came together.
Yeah, I think that this whole the stuff you're covering are definitely great topics. If you look at, for example, physician dictation analysis is a great example where one of the problems we have in medicine in the United States is there's just a lot of bureaucracy, and there's insurance companies and there's all these regulations, but it does seem like things are ripe for there to be like high level AI ML tools that help physicians. I mean, yeah, maybe that's where you start. Again, I just had surgery a few days ago, like not a crazy surgery, but they fused this bone together, my pinky, and I was talking to the anesthesiologist, and it seems like a lot of them are really, really motivated. They know that there are process problems. So here's a good example of a process problem like that would be similar to the thing that you just described, is that when you go into Duke and their medical system, every single person you talk to, they ask for your name and your date of birth. I get why they're doing this. I mean, we as software engineers, we know what they're doing, right? They're basically writing unit tests, and it's like, okay, that's interesting, right? That you're doing this, but you can just imagine, like, how much better of a process you could make if there was, immutable variables, like embedded somehow on you, and then they're just passively read, and then there isn't this human who accidentally puts the wrong year down, or puts the wrong side or whatever. I mean, which it wasn't amazing. I would, first of all, I don't want to make it like I'm complaining that their process is bad. It's actually exceptionally good, but I could see how there could be a lot of enhancements to really taking something that's a great process and then institutionalizing it and making automation. I think, I think your example here, I think that's definitely on point to what could be one of the new things that crops up.
Great to hear. We're not claiming that any of these are complete
Yeah.
and maybe drop into an enterprise, but I think, to your point, we really hope it inspires certain use cases, but gives a working POC at a simple level that then could be extended and expanded upon. And thank you, Network Labs, for the question about, if you have a practitioner level exam and maybe you don't have a ton of experience working in AWS because, whatever reason, just the time and length of your career, or the job that you have and its description currently. But I think the book can be used to help generate some experience. And we had that in mind when we wrote it, as we designed these scenarios that we walked you through and then talked about in a discussion section, why we thought that, what we had seen in the past, and what really led us to create that recipe. And every recipe has validation steps to ensure that you're, accomplishing the goal you set out to accomplish. And then maybe if it was an easy recipe for you, each recipe has a challenge section to really give you a nudge to take things further. Might be a good time to open up the screen share and crack into a recipe. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. We should get cooking.
That's why we wore these hats. We wore these hats to get cooking.
I think what we'll show today is a recipe from chapter 1. This is, as Noah mentioned, a security-focused chapter where we do a bunch of stuff that's pretty relevant to kind of your global account. In fact, even in our foreword that Jeff Barr from AWS wrote, he mentioned chapter 1's a good one to just go through if you have to pick one to run through. This is a good chapter because it kind of sets the foundation for a lot of things you'll end up doing in AWS. So I think we're set up to run here. One thing I wanted to mention, and John, maybe you can speak to this, is this link here.
We wanted to generate some code for the cookbook, and we made this GitHub landing page, which has a repo for each chapter. So each repo for each chapter will then contain code to prepare the recipes. And for the recipes that we're going to go over today, 1.6, we actually included the whole recipe. So if you're listening along now or in the future, know that you can go to GitHub. You don't even have to buy the book. You can copy and paste the commands. You can see the diagram and follow right along. So that's really a great feeling for us, knowing that we can provide assets to the community, because that's how we learned. Until somebody showed us, we didn't know either. So we wanted to make sure we gave back a little bit there. And this problem, I think, was, what you were saying before, Noah, about how the data centers, VMs are, a little bit antiquated. This is a great way to use an EC2 instance, I think, with some advanced functionality in AWS. So a common use case is you might have an EC2 instance and you need to connect to it, and you kind of don't want to do it over the internet. So how would you go about that? And this is what this solution is really meant to accomplish. So talk through a solution, Mike.
Yeah, so we do have a solution kind of summary here in text, but in every one of our recipes, we do have a diagram that shows kind of high level what you're going to be accomplishing. So we're going to create an IAM role, and we're going to attach the Amazon SSM Managed Instance Core policy. That's a mouthful. Create an EC2 instance profile. Attach the IAM role you created to the instance profile. Associate the profile to the instance, and then run a start session command to connect. Now, that's a lot of words. We have a step associated with each one of these. And just wanted to point out that some of these terms and this managed policy here, we do talk about them earlier in the chapter. So as you get to this point, there's some things that we don't really assume that you know. If you wanted to get a little more depth on those specific things, like an instance profile or a role or a profile, policy, you can definitely see examples of those in a little more depth in previous chapters. And so what we're going to do is, to run an instance, you do need a VPC, and you do need a way to connect to the endpoints for Systems Manager. What we do with a lot of our recipes is, as John mentioned, we have code associated with them, and we use the AWS CDK for this. And this code, at least for this chapter, sets you up with the prerequisites that you'll need. Now, if you already have a VPC and VPC endpoints for Systems Manager, you won't need to deploy our CDK. But for the purposes of this example, we'll go ahead and deploy with the CDK so that we know we've got a good foundation.
And that's how we really hoped this book would really help users of many levels. So maybe you're a beginner and never heard about this concept of using Session Manager connected to an instance. That's great. You can follow right along. Or maybe you knew about it, you've used it before, you've set it up manually. Well, now you have a chance to really dive into the CDK version 2, look at the code, modify it if you need to. You'll find out that deploys a VPC, subnets, route tables, And it also deploys the private endpoints. So get into a little bit more advanced networking functionality there to really ensure that no internet access is required.
And so we've got our preparation steps here. These are in the repository. And for every one of our recipes, the preparation steps are in the GitHub repositories. So I'm actually just going to copy this whole block of commands here. Oops. Let me go to my security chapter.
We have to pray to the demo gods as well.
I know, right? I'm changing the directory. I'm now setting up a Python virtual environment. These are all just copy and pasted right from our steps here.
And again, maybe you have an EC2 instance in an existing VPC that you could use. A lot of our steps will call out environment variables, which of course you can set to your existing instance if you have one. But I think it was a great way, speaking of learning, while you kind of try to teach, the CDK 2.0 was a great learning experience for me to be able to get my hands on that tool and work on a lot of examples.
I would bet a lot of people don't really know what CDK does. It might be worth just saying really quick, what's the problem that CDK solves?
That's a great point. So we're talking about how there needs to be an existing environment. So how do you create an existing environment from scratch? How do you declare it, if you will? So there's a lot of great code available that the CDK leverages. It will actually leverage. Let me step back. So when you have an environment that you want to declare, you're going to use infrastructure as code, because like this infrastructure, the VPCs, the subnets, the route tables, rather than pointing and clicking through the console, or even using the CLI, which are both correct measures, but if you're going to do it repeatedly, you want to have some code to do it. So this infrastructure as code is a very powerful concept. The CloudFormation is the service that really AWS we're leveraging in this case to do it. There's others, Terraform and whatnot, but CDK is a way to intelligently create CloudFormation templates. And Mike, I'll let you talk a little bit about the CDK since you have it open here.
Yeah, I popped open to our CDK code for this specific recipe, and all we're doing is creating a VPC and some interface endpoints here. These are required for Systems Manager, so we throw those in. And what's interesting is we don't actually give the VPC a internet gateway, so we don't even give this VPC the ability to go talk to the internet. Just these endpoints are present here, and we'll show you why that's kind of cool in a little bit here. But we say the subnet configuration is isolated subnets.
So it's very code that creates infrastructure as code.
Yep.
And I think what's cool about the concept of infrastructure as code is that, and this may not be clear to many people, is that what you're doing is you're creating an idempotent process that can be run over and over and over and over and over again. And if there's small little tweaks, it's trivial, right, to make these changes. And then if you want to double check before you do something, wait, what did I do again? you can just do the diff and it tells you some small incremental change that you made. So from in some sense, I would say CDK is like a superpower for working with AWS, because it's programmatically creating things that could in fact take a lot longer to create by hand, right? A lot longer. If you had to create all this stuff, the VPC and all this stuff, it could take 15 minutes maybe?
If you're maybe copy and pasting code yourself.
Yeah.
I think we could spend a whole show on the CDK as well. I agree, it's awesome. And it has the concept of constructs, which can bake in some smart defaults. So for example, every time you create an S3 bucket, you would want it encrypted. If you're deploying an SQS queue, you would want to have a dead letter queue. So you're right, it really brings the ability of ways to extend common deployments and improve them. And there it goes.
And when you do CDK, would you say you like your local Mac as much as you like, let's say, AWS Cloud Shell or Cloud9, or it's just random? All are good.
What do you like best, Mike?
I like working from my local workstation as much as possible, just because I have it set up the way that I like. But John and I ran a bunch of these in Cloud Shell, and they do work great. So Cloud Shell is really interesting. There's a few articles out there on how to maybe get CDK installed there, but Cloud9 is another great environment. The benefits of those are, whereas in my local here, I had to authenticate a session in my terminal environment so that I can communicate with AWS here locally. Whereas in Cloud9 or in Cloud Shell, you can have a role-based, so you don't have to worry about your local environment and having to initiate that. You're kind of inheriting a role that you're granting to that session. So it's one of the benefits of running in those environments. Really neat. Cloud Shell is really, really awesome. I'm definitely using it more and more every day.
Yeah, I've gravitated myself towards Cloud9 and Cloud Shell, partially because I do so much ad hoc demoing where, yeah, probably I'd be with you if I was mostly writing code again, where I'm spending 8 hours a day writing code. I mean, there's a lot to like about having a super customized Visual Studio environment or whatever editor you're using. If you're doing like really quick stuff, Cloud9 is tough to beat, especially because I like the integrations where they're starting to feel a little bit like Visual Studio. I don't know if either of you use the AWS toolkit for Visual Studio, but basically how you can just right click on Lambda. So like you could use CDK deploy, like let's say a Lambda, and then you just go over to the left and pull it down and then invoke a payload and go, oh, okay, good. Things work.
Yeah, it's awesome. And things like the IntelliType features, where if you're writing a IAM role or something, you're actually getting some suggestions right there in your terminal.
Yeah.
Your IDE.
Kind of another benefit of the cloud formation was that it creates a stack for each CDK deployment, and that's going to really contain your variables and your settings. So you'll see kind of in the next step how we're able to export those and set them to an environment variable, so that the subsequent steps, for example, if you're going to connect to an EC2 instance, you want to connect to your EC2 instance and not somebody else's in the cloud. So just another great benefit of this kind of CDK and all the goodness beneath it.
So as we're going and finishing these prerequisites here, as the CDK is finishing its deployment, we do point out to follow the steps in the recipes chapter code repository, and we link to it from every recipe. What you're looking at here is a copy of the book on the O'Reilly online learning platform.
Yeah, this is great because I actually teach in 3 different graduate programs, and I teach this kind of content. And I actually find that I use O'Reilly as one of my primary sources, where exactly what you're doing is what I do. I'll put this into the syllabus and I'll say, read this chapter, and then click on this code or click on these links. So I'm almost certain some of your recipes will show up in some of the courses I'm working on.
That's fantastic. We'd be so humbled. You'll have to let us know when you do that.
Okay.
So now that the CDK is deployed here, I'm going to look at this step in our prereqs here. We have this thing, helper py, and I'll show you what this does. So John and I wrote a little Python script that helps the reader run this and then set these variables to these values. Now, this is all output by CloudFormation under the hood. We just query CloudFormation with this Python script. And so all I'm going to do is copy these two. I'm going to paste them right in my bash environment here. And now I've actually got these as local variables. And that makes it much easier to go through now and start to set some of these commands up. And you'll notice in some of our commands as well, we actually do that. And so you'll come across that quite a bit in the book, where we say, well, you're going to create a role, but we actually also want the reader to save the role ARN in a local variable so that they can use it in a subsequent step. So we've really tried to go out of our way to make it as easy as possible for the reader to, copy and paste these out, but also be able to see what's going on.
Yeah, that's such a good idea I never even thought about that, but to query the CDK, get the key things that you created, and then then source those variables so that now you don't have to type a bunch of stuff in.
Yeah, we were excited how that came together. We got a lot of good feedback on it too. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to say, create a file named assume role policy. It says file provided in the repository. Now, if I look in the repository here, oh, I do have assume role policy.json. And so that's available for me to use in this command. I don't have to manually build that. So I'm just going to take step 2 here. I'm going to create an IAM role with the statement. What this is doing is it's just saying that this action is allowed by this service. So this is called an assume role policy.
And then I think this is a fancy command. I love command substitution to an environment variable. If that's something you're familiar with, great. And if you're not, we do provide a tips and techniques section. It's actually open in the GitHub repo now, so that's there for you to reference as you're kind of going through these and learning about these approaches that we take in the book.
Well, just the thing that I think you're doing too that I think is really important is highlighting the fact that there is no substitute for the command line. Like, as much as you want to pretend that you can do everything without the command line, that if you want to be an expert at cloud computing, you better learn the command line.
Definitely. We thought these examples, I mean, a lot of folks are getting a lot of great experience in the console, and that's definitely great. And we do it a little bit in the book too. We felt the command line was really important to introduce and show how easy it is, because really you understand the API a little bit better for all of these different services. So as you start to go a little bit deeper in your own cloud journey, when you have this comfort level of executing commands, there's a lot of power that can come from that.
I mean, and I would even say that would be a pretty good way to demonstrate competency for AWS Cloud is if you know what you're doing here and you feel comfortable with it and you can explain it to people, then that would make me confident to hire that person. If you do not have this level of competency, I would be very concerned.
Agreed. I saw a little question come in the comments here from a viewer who's talking about, would it be a good way to get this book to maybe get a first job in the industry at that beginner level? And certainly getting the experience on the command line is pretty critical to starting to work with any type of public cloud provider. So I definitely recommend looking through some of these things. And, if you exhaust some of the free stuff that we put on the GitHub repo, the online platform is a great place to look for this book and more from O'Reilly.
And what's cool about your examples here too is that, again, because I'm a little bit of a zealot for Cloud Shell, is what I like about your book is it's like, ooh, here we go. Like, there would be almost no work to run everything you're showing me in the book in Cloud Shell because it's role based.
You're pushing us, but in a good way. We do have some secret scripts that we use to kind of build the book, and one of them was to really bootstrap a Cloud Shell environment, like checking out the repos. So that's a good challenge. We'll have to clean that up and get that out there. The only chapter that really maybe wouldn't work excellent with it would be the Docker chapter if you had to run some Docker commands. But we'll try to get that out there for you. And I just saw a question about cost. Sorry, Mike. I'll let you go finish what you're doing here.
No problem. I just wanted to call it really quick. I did go through some of these steps here, just attaching the role policy, attaching the role to the instance profile we created. And in our book, we've got a lot of great little notes and tips here. And really, instance profile and roles are sometimes confused by some folks. The instance profile allows an instance to define who it is, and then the role defines what is it permitted to do. So if you ever have a question about that come up on an exam, or if you're trying to figure out what's an instance profile, what's a role, that's really the differentiator there. And so I just did that. Caught up here.
I see really a mapping too, right? Because you have policies which are attached to a role, and the role is mapped to a profile. The profile is associated with an EC2 instance. So, like talked about before, the documentation needs to be referenced a lot, and we're glad we can do that from the book.
So I ran this command here to set an AMI ID. Now, if I look at my variable here, I get an AMI ID. What we did was we queried Amazon to give us the latest Amazon Linux 2 AMI ID available in this region. And we're going to need that in this next command. So we saved it as a variable. And we're going to launch an instance now using that AMI ID in the subnet that we outputted from the CDK, an instance type T3 Nano. And we're also going to give it the instance profile that we created. That's going to allow this instance to register with AWS Systems Manager as soon as it boots up. And
Yep. Nice copy and paste. And the security group too that we outputted from the CDK. So it's going to be your security group ID.
Yep. So this is the run instances command. Now, if I echo,
I think that AMI search is really slick, and you kind of forget the need for a command like that, knowing that the AMIs will be updated and patched. There's going to be a different AMI ID, so that's something you could really include in CI/CDK process to really make sure every time it runs, it pulls the latest and then uses that.
And you could search, I'm assuming, your own AMIs probably with that same command too.
Sure, and that's one. I think what you pointed out before about how the book forces you to use the CLI. A lot of great examples of filters and queries to really see how you could, search through a list. Like
I'm a fan of AMIs that have EFS mounted already, right? Because then it's like you have like everything's there for you, right? Like you have your own AMI, and then you also have your own living file system.
it's really slick for auto scaling scenarios where you've just got
Exactly
these popping up and they connect right to your data and serve your web page or whatever you're doing. So as we wait for this instance to launch here, it should only take a couple seconds. I wanted to call out that in this run instances command, we also threw in this great, it's kind of a security best practice here. We're telling this instance to use the instance metadata v2. Now it's a little more advanced here, but this is a newer version of the instance metadata service, which will actually run a quick command to validate that works. But what it does is it forces an authentication step before you just query instance metadata. An instance can get to a private endpoint that has information about itself. And this v2 has a token that you need to pass to be able to query. And so it's a little extra layer of security when you launch your instance. So I'm gonna
I've called that. Yeah, that's like the internal IP address URL that you just say, hey, what am I? That's essentially the API you're calling.
Yep.
Yeah, that one, 169.
Yep. So we'll pop into that in a second. So what I'm going to do here, we have validation checks for all of our recipes in the book. And I'm just going to pop this command here and see if it outputs the ID of our instance.
This is important to us to really make sure we provided steps to confirm the results that we said we were going to get.
Yep. So you see, this is the instance ID. I asked SSM to give me instance information for everything that it knows about. So in this case, it's just a single instance that I launched. So that shows up.
To prove it, Mike, you could echo that instance ID environment variable that you command substitution.
Right there.
But yeah, there you go.
Boom.
Missed it.
And then what I'm going to do now is the whole point of the recipe was to be able to connect to an instance without using SSH over the internet. Now, this SSM start session, I want to mention in our prerequisites, you do need AWS CLI v2, and you do need to have the session manager plugin installed. It's a quick install for all platforms, so take a look at that. But you'll definitely need that to be installed for this next command I'm going to run to validate that this actually worked. So all I'm going to do is say SSM start session target instance ID. And so now I have a bash shell on this instance that I launched without using any SSH. Furthermore, this instance doesn't even have a security group rule that allows any ports inbound. It only allows port outbound 443 to the AWS endpoints. So very, very powerful there. There's no ports open. SSM brokers the connection between my local workstation here and that instance running in a private subnet. So if I pop in here and I want to run these two commands just to query the metadata service to prove that we're on this instance, I'm going to get a token, save it as a local environment variable, and then I'm just going to query the metadata service for the IAM info of this instance, and I'm going to pass this token with it. These are all copy and pastable, so you don't have to worry. And so you see here that I've got this instance profile. All looks good. This is Amazon Linux.
Just proving you're running those commands on the EC2 instance, not your local.
Yep. And it doesn't have any internet access, so I shouldn't be able to ping anything outbound. So it's an isolated instance. We've connected to it, and we're on it. One other thing to kind of show is in the console. So here's the instance that I launched. I can actually just select it. You see here, and click connect with Session Manager. And so it's going to use the role that I have logged in the console here, which is actually the same role I'm using in my terminal. But you'll see Systems Manager do its thing.
Go gadget.
Same thing.
So is the use case behind this scenario is kind of an interesting one. Would you have, let's say you're creating a middleware service or something like that, and it's never going to be exposed to the outside world, and you want to just kind of, I don't know, test some stuff out, and so you would set up an EC2 instance and then do the SSM into it, and then from there maybe like test a little code out, and you don't have to worry about security because you're basically like your code is, you become your code that's living in this little middleware piece that never is exposed to the outside world. Would that be one of the use cases?
I think that's a great use case there. Like it's almost kind of air gapped. I mean, it's still got some connection to the AWS endpoints that it needs, which are privately deployed inside your VPC, so it can securely communicate with those. But I see a lot of customers now, big companies that I work with every day, that are using this as the only method of connection. They're saying, you can't use SSH anymore. We don't want those keys floating around, or that, you can't do it this old way. So there's large organizations that are now standardizing on this type of connection paradigm. So it's really, really powerful. And we do go into that a little bit in the discussion, specifically for this one. We talk about some pros and cons and use cases.
But you're right. Like the classic problem of the ops guy just got fired. Like,
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
Whoops. Well, so yeah, we SSH into machines, and now what do we do?
Exactly.
It's not like it's completely unsolvable, because once they're removed from AWS, then in theory they can't get in. But you're doing a little bit of a security by obscurity kind of an issue, where if for some reason there still was a way that they were able to get inside of your system accidentally, and you thought that they weren't, because they have that SSH key, they can do anything they want.
Yep. Whereas in this way, if you just revoke their AWS access, and if you're federating, you just disable their account, you'd be able to guarantee that they can't access. And Systems Manager also has some great logging capability. So you can actually log all the commands of a session, which is really cool. You can log and archive all those. If you ever have to go back and look at what happened during a session, you can definitely do that. And we even call that out. In all of our recipes, we have a challenge to kind of just maybe have an advanced reader, or even a beginner that's looking to do a little bit more and extend. Go ahead and look at the logs for the session and see if you could set up an alert whenever the RM command is executed. So it's really, really interesting stuff. And we've tried to throw in a challenge like that in every single one of our recipes to show how you can take this, the next step.
Yeah, it's funny because I try to do similar stuff in the books that I write, in that I ask like critical thinking questions, and then like examples. And one of the things that I think many people would want to know is that, I mean, you're both experts at AWS and work at AWS, that someone is giving you a breadcrumb here of, listen, you should
Mhm.
know this. So if you don't know this, learn it, and then it's going to help you, get to the point where if you were in the future going to apply for a position that required AWS, very likely the things that someone's asking you would be these skills. So I think if someone could read your book, and if they were very motivated, just go to every single challenge exercise and just do it. And that probably would be a pretty close proximity to you have the skill to be hired to do things on AWS.
You're
Definitely.
right. Just like any cookbook, you could then take it and flavor it yourself. So in the challenge here, we're talking about logging and detecting the RM command. Maybe the industry you work in has a requirement to look for another command or a similar string. Well, you already have like kind of the basis here to take you there.
Yeah, that's one of the things I recommend a lot to people that are looking for jobs, is that you should get certified, but also you should have a portfolio of work that you created, not that you like forked someone's repo, but you personally created it and that you can explain. Because if you go through an interview, it's a lot better for the interview to be about the stuff that you could talk about for 4 hours, versus they'll tell you what to talk about and then the interview could not go well, right? Because they're asking you all these weird questions, versus if it's something like, again, they went through your book and put their own flavors on all these different recipes, and they said, hey, I'll walk you through every single one of these examples. If I was hiring somebody and that's what they were showing me, I would definitely, think positively of the candidate, because they're explaining exactly what they would do in the job.
Yeah,
If they were
definitely.
presented with that situation, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we're at the point at the end of the recipe, which is sad, but also happy because now we can go to the cleanup steps, and that'll answer the question about cost. So we wanted to provide these cleanup steps to provide readers a way to destroy all the resources that they created in their account. So whatever account these are created in will incur costs. We do mention in the preface how there is a free tier at AWS, and some of these recipes will go outside of that. There's also some great, well-architected labs that allow you to kind of create some costing dashboards and alert, and even budget actions when certain thresholds are hit. So definitely recommend that is understood and realized. But we wanted to really provide these commands as well to not only keep things tidy, but also keep your costs down as you went through the book.
But it's per second billing. I mean, that's one of the nice things about AWS, is that in theory, the cost should be very minimal, right? With many of your recipes.
I think one of the great things about the cloud, right, is the
Yeah.
on-demand usage of these resources. So you're right. If you're not using them, you can tear them down and not have to pay for them.
Some
And
good work.
unlike inflation with other goods, AWS goes down in price, right?
That's good. CDK on the deploy. Let's see if there's any other questions while we're here.
Yeah. So I know you had mentioned you had time for about 45 minutes or so. So we're roughly about 45 minutes. I'm happy to talk as long as you like, but yeah, anything else you think would be interesting to cover?
Definitely, I think just want to keep reminding everybody that this code is out there on GitHub, but the setup and the entirety of this recipe is there. So if you're hearing this and maybe we didn't explain something and you want to follow along yourself, please and please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And let's see, I'm looking at my checklist here. Validation steps.
Yeah, maybe tell people how they can get a hold of both of you and ask questions.
Absolutely. I am Jay Culkin on Twitter and C Kilborn on Reddit. And I want to give a quick shout out to the AWS subreddit. If you're looking for a great place to ask questions and actually read and understand what questions others are having, I think it's a great way to stay current. It really helped me in my career.
Cool.
Good shout out there. I'm Mzazon, Mzazon on Twitter and GitHub both. You can definitely find me on both often. And also on LinkedIn. I wanted to show here really quick our Getting Started repo. We've pinned it at the top of our AWS org. We do have the preface here. It's really great to read this to kind of frame the whole book. And as John mentioned before, the techniques and approaches, it's a really great resource in here. In fact, there's a lot of great little hints and tidbits in here on just using the command line and some of the things we do in the book. So great to get familiar with these. We've pinned the repo at the top. So if you go to github.com/AWS Cookbook, you'll be able to get started there.
Nice. Yeah, this looks like a lot of great recipes for people. I definitely will myself look at some of your recipes and try them out, and I'll make sure I tag you somehow when I use one of them and play around with it.
Awesome.
And I don't know how to do this, but we have 3 free digital copies that we'd love to give out. How should we gamify that, Noah? Any suggestions?
Well, I mean, I'm a huge fan of greedy algorithms, and the fact that there are 3 people in chat seems like probably a good way to do it, right?
That sounds perfect. So if you can list your email addresses, we'd be happy to get those over to you.
Awesome.
Yeah, because we have Rodrigo Alvarez, Networking Labs, and CMC 265. Those are 3 people, 3 copies. There we go.
Perfect.
Thanks so much. This was great. Thanks for having us, Noah.
Yeah, anytime. I try to do this, like, usually I do it on Tuesdays around 4 o'clock or so. But yeah, anytime. I'm happy to talk about AWS. I'm going deep this year myself, and nice to make your acquaintance. And I always like talking with people at AWS. It's super fun. I'm a huge fan of the AWS platform.
It's powerful. It's been a great ride so far. I look forward to cooking more on AWS.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll end the broadcast and talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.